There's really no other way to put it. Notre Dame is not a good football team right now, and there were signs, and we either missed them or just chose to ignore them completely.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Sunday, October 8th, and thanks for making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and a producer covering college football for Fox Sports, and today I am sad. Doing this one a little bit different today, releasing this on Sunday because during a normal weekend, I usually spend my Sunday mornings rewatching the Notre Dame game and starting to think about what I'm doing for the pod, and then I got to go to my other job, and then I record later that night once I've had a full day to think about the game that happened the day before, different angles, things like that. But honestly, what's the point? Like, we all watched that game last night. We all saw how badly Louisville manhandled Notre Dame on both sides of the ball as they went on to win 33-20. First off, hats off to them. Hats off to the crowd in Louisville. Like I said before the game, it's going to be their Super Bowl. They're going to come up ready to go, and they did. And Notre Dame was shell-shocked from the very beginning. From the interception on the opening drive by Sam Hartman, Notre Dame was trying to come back the entire game, and Louisville didn't let it happen. Big win for their program, big win for their fan base. I know a lot of my friends are very happy about that. They might be listening to this, ready to dance on my grave even more. And, congrats to them. Notre Dame got absolutely handled. They were not prepared. Marcus Freeman even said so after the game. So really, this podcast is just going to be an instant reaction, I guess you could say, stream of consciousness. Don't have a ton written down or anything like that. I'm just going to give my unfiltered thoughts about the game, what it means for Notre Dame. And I'm basically going to divide this podcast up into three parts. How/why it happened, what Notre Dame needs to fix, and there's a whole lot. And then at the end, I'll just try to take a look at this from the big picture perspective and think, what does this mean for Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame going forward? Because even though this 2023 season is effectively over in the sense that Notre Dame cannot make the playoff, they cannot achieve their goals this season, there's still a lot of football to be played, and the rest of the season could go a long way in determining what happens for Notre Dame in the years to come. So a lot to get to today, but let's start with how it happened. And something that's just been on my mind ever since the game ended is last night was basically all of our concerns about Notre Dame and about this team from the offseason being put under a microscope for 60 minutes on Saturday. So here's what I mean. College football is interesting because it is the shortest season of any sport and the longest offseason. Like, really, it's only a 3-month season. You got September, October, November, and then teams play 1, maybe 2 games in December and January, and that's it. So we're in the offseason for a solid 9 months. And as we know, in college football, what happens in the offseason directly impacts wins and losses on the field. But things happen in the offseason that are either positive or negative, and it's more difficult to assign how many wins or how many losses that's going to turn into. Like how one move in the offseason or one thing that happens, how is that going to directly correlate with the win-loss record at the end of the year? And with so much time in between, it's easy to sort of forget or move on or just try to ignore those things. And as we've talked about a ton on this podcast, Notre Dame did not have a very good offseason. There was a lot of things that happened. The one good thing was adding Sam Hartman in the transfer portal, but other than that, it was mostly bad news coming into the season. And Notre Dame has been able to make up for some of that. Some of the things that we thought would be concerns were not concerns right away. But on Saturday, it was all out there. And there's a bunch of different things we could talk about. So let's start off with the most obvious one, Notre Dame's offensive coordinator hiring debacle. And when Tommy Rees, a former Notre Dame quarterback, elected to join Nick Saban in Alabama, leaving a Notre Dame team who just 1 year prior said he believed could win the national championship, once he decided to leave to go to Alabama, and I don't care what you think about Tommy Rees and how good of an offensive coordinator he is or how you feel about him now that he left Notre Dame, that alone, that fact that a former Notre Dame quarterback who's the current offensive coordinator would leave to go to Alabama, even if we can understand the move, that's a pretty bitter pill to swallow. And it was the first domino to fall in a chain of really just confusing things in hiring his replacement. So I don't have to rehash the whole thing. Marcus Freeman clearly wants to go with an outside hire, looks at Kansas State's offensive coordinator. It looks like Andy Ludwig, Utah's offensive coordinator, was going to get the job. then, who knows the exact reason? I'm not going to get into all that right now. For whatever reason, it doesn't work out. But clearly, Marcus Freeman wanted to go with someone not on his current staff. But ultimately, he has to hire or promote Jared Parker, the tight ends coach, who is his guy, who he knows very well. And clearly, Marcus did not want to hire him initially. He's got to go with him because, frankly, he didn't really have that many other options to turn to at that point. So he ends up promoting one of his friends, someone he knows very well, to be the offensive coordinator, a guy who does not have much experience at the position. And when you already have an inexperienced head coach, that was going to lead to problems. And it certainly did on Saturday night because Notre Dame's offense had no plan. They got dominated in multiple facets of that side of the ball, and it was just never clicking. And it looked like an offensive coordinator who was very inexperienced and was going up against a much more experienced coaching staff and just had no answer. So that's one thing. Then not long after Tommy left, Harry Hiestand retired. And, Notre Dame hired a pretty experienced replacement in Joe Rudolph, but the fact that Harry Hiestand is one of the, if not the greatest college offensive line coach in years, the fact that he just wanted to retire, looking at what Notre Dame had on the line, you would think that he would have wanted to stay, even though he was friends with Tommy Rees, and that was a big reason why he came back to Notre Dame. Once he retired, you're like, oh, that's concerning. Maybe he doesn't believe in this group, or maybe just doesn't want to work for Marcus Freeman if he doesn't have Tommy Rees. And on Saturday, Notre Dame's offensive line got dominated by Louisville's defensive line. I thought that Louisville's defensive line was good. I thought they were disruptive. I did not think that they would be able to just dominate Notre Dame's unit like they did, but they did. And I think when Harry Hiestand retired, maybe he saw something. And then you could look at the 5-star decommitments that happened. I don't know if any of you watched the Oklahoma-Texas game. You might have seen Peyton Bowen out there making some plays, including a forced fumble on Quinn Ewers. Would have been nice to have him. Instead, Notre Dame is starting DJ Brown, who has had a tough stretch lately. He missed some critical tackles on some touchdowns by Louisville in that game. That could have been Peyton Bowen. Instead, he's at Oklahoma. And I know that recruitment was just a ridiculous saga in itself, but still, these are things that Notre Dame were it affected them in the offseason, and we sort of got over it. And now we're seeing on Saturday, hey, if that had gone a different way, it would have really helped Notre Dame on this specific Saturday and throughout the season. Notre Dame was without Jordan Botelho for the first half of this one. It would have been nice to have Keon Keeley. He's at Alabama. Grad transfer wide receiver Caleb Smith, he quit the team, and Notre Dame definitely needed some help at wide receiver. They added a guy who was a miss. He quit the team in spring practice because he realized he wasn't as good as the freshmen who were on the team. And while that's encouraging to hear that Notre Dame's freshmen are talented, still, Notre Dame needed some guys at wide receiver, not just one guy. They needed probably at least two, and they didn't get any because Caleb Smith was just a dud. So that was a miss. And then you look at the schedule, and I don't know who you want to blame for this, but when we were looking at it in the preseason, you're thinking, man, 8 straight games without a bye. And then you look specifically at the 4-game stretch that starts with Ohio State, then at Duke, then at Louisville, then home again against USC. We all knew that was going to be tough. And now it's even harder because Duke is better than we thought they'd be. Louisville is better than we thought they'd be. Hell, Ohio State is a little bit more gettable. Notre Dame wasn't able to get that. And now they've got USC coming up next week. So these were all things that I talked about a lot on this podcast. A lot of other Notre Dame podcasts talked about. And now we're seeing it come to fruition on Saturdays. You've got an inexperienced head coach leading the way, and he doesn't have any answers right now. One of my friends actually joked in a group chat this morning that Marcus Freeman needs like a 10-second rule when he answers questions at the post-game press conference because his answers usually leave you with a lot more questions than before. And I understand that after a game like that, your emotions are probably high and you're just upset. And still, though, man, you're the head coach at Notre Dame. And when you get smacked like that on the biggest stage and you have no idea how it happened and you just sound completely lost at your presser, that's not a good sign for things to come. For him, for the football program, for anyone, really, who has a vested interest in this Notre Dame football team. But it was a long offseason, and it's been a long 3 weeks, really, and Notre Dame has a lot to fix, and they need to do it quickly. And we'll start to get into those things coming up right after this. Now time for your Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Much like Sam Hartman has done for the Notre Dame football program, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. They're full of flavor and well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. All All right, before we get back to the Louisville game, I wanted to remind you that if you are following the show and you like what you see or hear, please like the video below and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, subscribe. Help me out because it's been a tough couple days and it's going to continue to be tough. And I know that there's a lot of Louisville fans turning into this one. And hey, I just want to say I appreciate the view. And if you want to comment and troll me and dance on my grave a little bit more, your engagement helps out the show. So I appreciate you tuning in as well. But let's get back to what Notre Dame needs to fix. And I think the most glaring problem right now is on the offense. I mean, Notre Dame does not have an identity. And the fact that we're, more than halfway through the season and Notre Dame has a quarterback like Sam Hartman who, even though he had a really tough game against Louisville, I think he finished with 4 total turnovers because he was attributed with that fumble, even though I don't know if that was really his fault. He did have 3 interceptions. He's a top 5, top 10 quarterback in college football right now, and Notre Dame has no idea how to utilize him against quality opponents. He looked really good at the start of the year, beating up on Navy, beating up on Tennessee State, Central Michigan, hell, even NC State, but against good defenses like Ohio State, Duke, now Louisville's in that conversation as well, hasn't played his best. And of course, it's not all of his fault. The offensive line played terribly last night. Sam Hartman got sacked 5 times. He was under pressure a hell of a lot more. And I think Notre Dame just has to figure out what they're doing on offense as a whole, but specifically with that offensive line unit. Because if I have to hear one more national media person say Notre Dame has a really good offensive line, tell me you don't watch Notre Dame without telling me you don't watch Notre Dame. That offensive line is not good. They had a good start to the year maybe against those bad teams, but that is not a good unit right now. And it's clear as day. Hell, even Joe Alt, who's a future NFL first rounder, I'm not saying he's a bad player, but he did not have a good game against Louisville. He got dominated a couple times. And even though I said Louisville has a good defensive line, they should not be able to dominate Notre Dame like that. That's embarrassing. Notre Dame was terrible on 3rd and short. And yes, they tried to get too cute. That's on Jared Parker a couple times. But then they just were getting blown off the ball. And then Blake Fisher had another false start. I don't know what happened to him. He has regressed tremendously since his freshman year. Hell, he looked better when he was playing against Oklahoma State after missing his entire freshman regular season almost because of a torn knee. Now he's a junior, and I just have no idea what he's doing out there. And it's not just him. The interior, I don't know what's going on. Joe Alt said after the game that Notre Dame had it in their game plan to rotate guys on the offensive line. Why are you doing that at this point in the season? I understand that the interior had a rough game against Duke, but rotating 4 different offensive line combinations mid-game is going to somehow help. That was a crazy idea before, and it was readily apparent in the game. When Notre Dame started mixing it up, they just got blown back even more. Billy Strouth, he could be a good football player. He got absolutely dominated when he came in. So I have no idea what that was about. I don't know if that's Jared Parker's call, if that's Joe Rudolph's, if that's Marcus Freeman. No idea. But they need to figure that out. And that unit needs to step up because they're going up against USC this week. USC's defense is certainly gettable, but last year USC's defense was able to control the line of scrimmage against Notre Dame. So I have no reason to believe that they're all of a sudden going to just figure it out on Saturday. So that's the first thing. Figure out the offensive line, stick with the group, go with it, and just really lean into them because, as we've said many times before, offensive line is built with experience and reps with all 5 guys playing together. As far as I know, no one's hurt right now on that line. So at least keep the guys who you think are the best 5 guys, keep them out there, let them work together, and hopefully they'll improve the rest of the way. And then the wide receivers, that was just an embarrassing performance from Notre Dame's wide receivers. The best performance they got was from a lacrosse player who is a walk-on in the football team. Once again, Mitchell Evans, the leading receiver for Notre Dame, 4 catches, 71 yards and a touchdown. Great to see him coming on, but the rest of Notre Dame's receivers just completely no-showed. Chris Tyree had a critical drop on a surefire touchdown. Jaden Thomas is back. He's definitely not fully healthy. He was limping a lot during the game. A couple catches, 33 yards. That's pretty much it. Rico Flores had 3 catches, 13 yards. He's definitely hit a freshman wall. Jaden Greathouse is clearly not as healthy as we thought he might be, but someone has got to step up offensively. It's got to be someone because Audric Esme didn't have a good game. The receivers aren't doing anything. They're just running around out there. And I understand that a guy like Tobias Merriweather is probably out there more than he should be, and it's not his fault entirely that Notre Dame doesn't have enough good players behind him to rotate in. But look, man, you are a 4-star recruit, really talented athlete. You got to eventually be productive in the passing game if you're going to be out there for as much as he is, and he just hasn't done anything. This is also on Jared Parker because I have no idea what the plan was going into that game. I know I've said before I don't like questioning the play caller, and I'm not going to go over every single play, but when you're running like end around on 3rd and 1 that had no shot to begin with, that's questionable. Notre Dame, as Dan Orlovsky pointed out on Twitter, Notre Dame doesn't run any motion or do anything to put their skilled players in favorable positions. Like, look at what Louisville does with their guys. They have a quarterback in Jack Plummer who is not by any stretch like a top 10 or top 15 quarterback in college football. He didn't even play that great last night, but he was able to get the ball to Jamari Thrash, who is their best wide receiver, and then Thrash had a great game for Louisville. Like, Notre Dame just has nothing in the playbook, really, to get the ball to their best players on the outside in space so they can make plays. And frankly, that's on the offensive coordinator. And I know that this is his first year as the full-time OC, but look, you can't really learn on the job at Notre Dame to this extent. Like, Notre Dame needed to win that game. That is a loss that cannot happen, and an offensive performance like that is unacceptable, frankly. And that's on Jared Parker. Hopefully he's able to figure it out to some extent against USC because, I mean, they just gave up over 40 points to Arizona. But I don't have any idea what Notre Dame's plan was in that game, and it showed. Notre Dame was not productive at any point during that game, really, until the end, and it was garbage time, and then they were able to move the ball. Defensively, they're not the issue. They're not the reason why Notre Dame lost, but there's still definitely some things they need to clean up. They need to clean up the play at safety. They need to be better at tackling. Maris Leofau had just a back-breaking face mask penalty that was unfortunate, and some people were saying it shouldn't have been called, but you can't watch that replay and say he didn't face mask, and if the ref sees it, then of course he's going to call the flag, and that was pretty much the game. Notre Dame forced a critical stop on 3rd down, and then that happens, and then Louisville basically ices the game a few plays later. So there's some things they need to clean up. They're just not a very disciplined team, and they didn't look well prepared. They got absolutely gashed by Louisville's running game, and at different points they were able to hold them in check, but on 1st down it just felt like Louisville was just getting 5 yards every single time, and then Notre Dame's defense was playing behind. I don't know why they weren't blitzing as much early on. They started to blitz more as the game went on, but I thought that was a little peculiar. But again, when the offense gives you just absolutely nothing to work with, then you really can't blame it all on the defense, because I think overall, when you look at how they've played throughout the course of the season, they've been a much better unit than the offense. And eventually, when they're on the field all the time and Louisville's getting the ball in great field position practically every single time they touch the ball, what do you really think is going to happen? Like, Louisville has good players. Eventually, they're going to score, and they did. So when I look at this game, sure, defensively, there's some stuff you got to clean up, but really, it all goes back to the offense for me, and just how miserable it is to watch this group. Like, I might be sounding dramatic there, but it is almost as bad as last year. Certainly on Saturday it was, and watching last year's offense was one of the least enjoyable things I've ever experienced as a Notre Dame fan, and Saturday is certainly up there as well, because the offense is it's boring. It's not ever successful really at this point, and there's never a point in time where you're like, all right, well, we can really count on X to make a play. It just doesn't exist right now. The week before was Sam Hartman just carrying the team on his back, and now we got to look at the Duke game differently, because that now feels like a fluke. And honestly, Notre Dame very well could be 4-3 right now. Hell, if Marcus Freeman got what he wanted when he initially called the run play to Audric Estime against Duke, Spencer Schrader could have missed that field goal, and now all of a sudden we're talking about Marcus Freeman in an even a much worse light, and he's under a lot of pressure right now. And as we look at this big picture, he's got a lot of questions to answer, and we'll start to look at those coming up right after this. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. So now that Notre Dame's season is effectively over, and Notre Dame has got a few more games left on the schedule, and hopefully they're able to finish strong, I think it's about time to start thinking, where does ND go from here? Not only this season, but big picture, because Marcus Freeman has a ton of questions to answer, and he's going to have a good opportunity this weekend going up against USC. It's going to be a very difficult task, but at least the opportunity presents itself to bounce back, get a big win against your rival, who is certainly gettable. They barely beat Arizona last night, but there's also a world where USC blows out Notre Dame. because in order to beat USC, you have to keep up with them on offense. And right now, Notre Dame's offense has not been able to do that. So right now, I'm kind of getting 2014 vibes, which is really unfortunate. And what I mean by that is in 2014, Notre Dame started the season 6-0, I believe. They go to Florida State, biggest game of the season. They come so close to winning, so close. And I, to this day, think the offensive pass interference call was ridiculous then. It's ridiculous now. Notre Dame loses a heartbreaker to the number one team in the country, and then they scrape by Navy the week after, and then they just crater the rest of the season. When there was a point in the season when everything felt possible, and then it just all fell apart, that's sort of how I'm feeling right now, because there was a point during the fourth quarter of that Ohio State game where you're thinking anything is possible this season. Obviously, they blow that game. They lose. They somehow squeak by Duke. They get blown out by Louisville. And now anything is possible this season in the wrong way. This is looking like an 8-4 team. Hell, they could go 7-5, which would be unbelievably embarrassing for the program, especially when you have a quarterback like Sam Hartman there. And you also have to consider where the program was just a few weeks ago. So to be at that level in the college football world and then potentially fall off as hard as they could, it's a really dangerous place to be in for Marcus Freeman and this Notre Dame football program. So he's been in this position before to an extent last year when Notre Dame started the season 0-2 and all the preseason goals and expectations were out the door before the third week of September. That was really bad then. So at least he's been in somewhat of a similar situation before, but he has a ton of pressure on him to figure things out and figure things out quickly. Because even if Notre Dame loses to USC, they go into the bye, there's still a world where they could finish 9-3, which by no means is a given, by the way. I'm not saying that's guaranteed, even if, whatever happens against USC. I mean, 10-2 is obviously the best case scenario. I don't know how realistic that is right now. So right now it feels like 9-3 might be the best case. Obviously, that's not what you wanted going into this season, but considering where Notre Dame is at right now, I would take it. It sucks, but it's true. And then Marcus Freeman has a lot to figure out in the offseason if that's what happens. And the first thing is figuring out the coaching staff, figuring out the roster, because I think if you look at Notre Dame's roster right now, they're a talented group. Yes, they have deficiencies at multiple position groups, and they're not playing to their full potential. But the idea that this roster is just a void of talent is not true. They have Sam Hartman. They have a top 10 quarterback at the most important position. They've got really good running backs. They have offensive linemen who are really high recruits. On defense, they've got some really good players, including a future first-round draft pick in Benjamin Morrison. Like, this team is not playing to their potential, and you have to look at the head coach when that happens. You have to. Because Marcus Freeman has been saying for weeks that this Notre Dame team has not played to their full potential. Well, who's responsible for getting them there? It's the coach, the head coach, and the rest of the coaching staff. And I think Notre Dame has some talented assistant coaches, but clearly there's some flaws there. Marcus Freeman has to identify them and figure that out and improve that going beyond this season, looking ahead to next season and down the road, because this is a very critical stretch for Freeman and his tenure at Notre Dame, because he's a very young coach and he's got a lot to learn and he's got to do it all very quickly. And he's learning in real time under a ton of pressure with a huge spotlight. And when Marcus Freeman was hired, the fan base, I feel like, was very patient with him, far more patient than they've been with pretty much any other head coaching hire, because they knew he was young, they knew he was inexperienced, and they knew he was going to have to learn on the job. But that learning curve is a lot steeper than any of us had anticipated. When Freeman was hired, you're thinking the best case scenario was that he would be able to pick up right where Brian Kelly left off, pick up recruiting a little bit, get more talent in the building, and then be able to continue on that upward slope. Because this idea that Brian Kelly left the program in shambles is a blatant lie. And if you believe that, you just don't like Brian Kelly, because he left the program on an 11-1 team that was very close to the playoff. And yeah, there were some holes for sure, but Marcus Freeman seems like he's created more. It's not like everything is just getting better. It's getting a lot worse quickly. So I'm not saying, Marcus Freeman's job should be in danger or anything like that at all. It would be insane to do that right now. But clearly, he is not he was not as ready to be a head coach as we thought he was. We were all kind of hoping that it'd be like a Ryan Day scenario where Urban Meyer leaves, Ryan Day picks up right where he leaves off, and he's able to at least, keep the team at that level. And yeah, sure, Ryan Day has been under fire by the Ohio State fan base, but I'd much rather be where Ohio State is right now than Notre Dame. Or you could look at Lincoln Riley when he took over for Bob Stoops at Oklahoma. He had no head coaching experience either, and then he went to the college football playoff a couple of times. He was able to keep the momentum going. Marcus Freeman has not been able to do that. And maybe he will develop into a really good head coach. Maybe he will be able to get the program to where we want it to be. Maybe after this offseason, he goes even harder on the recruiting trail, figures things out, and Notre Dame has a much better offseason. But right now, there is not a ton of evidence that Marcus Freeman can get to that level. And if you want to point out the win against Clemson last year when Notre Dame dominated Clemson and they were ranked in the top 5, how good does that win look like now? Because that team, right after they lost to Notre Dame, they ended up losing 2 more games that season, and this year they aren't much better. So I don't really look at that win as some great moment from Marcus Freeman and proof that he can get Notre Dame to the level they need to be. Again, I'm not out on him. I'm just pointing out what feels obvious to me is that he's not a great head coach right now. He got absolutely outcoached by Jeff Brom in every facet of the game. Now, Jeff Brom has been around a lot longer, so maybe we should have seen that coming. And again, Marcus Freeman, there's a lot of great things about him. He's very charismatic. I think he's a really, really hard worker, and I think that he's going to be able, or if he's able to recognize what the problems are, I have no doubt that he will do everything in his power to fix them. I just don't know if he's able to recognize those problems right now. And maybe I'm reading too much into his post-game press conferences and things like that, but I'm also looking at the results in the field and just questioning how this Notre Dame team, with as much talent as they have, are in this position. And again, it's not all his fault. It's not his fault that Notre Dame is playing 8 straight games to start the season. They started the season in Ireland, and it's a very difficult task. Now, this week, they're going to have to go up against USC after playing 7 games in a row, 3 straight night games during midterms week. It's a very difficult challenge. I get that. It's a very difficult job. It's why, it's one of the most difficult jobs in the country, and it's why most first-time head coaches don't work out at Notre Dame. And I'm not ready to say that this Marcus Freeman thing is over or it's not going to work out, but I'm saying that it has not gone to plan, and there isn't a ton of evidence that it's going to get much better in a hurry. And it's a really difficult place for Notre Dame to be in. And again, he has a great opportunity this Saturday against USC to sort of fix those wrongs, because it would be a really impressive win if Notre Dame is able to get off the mat here, beat their rival at home, a top 10 team with a Heisman Trophy winner, and then maybe you can carry that momentum throughout the rest of the season. And then if Notre Dame finishes 10-2, 9-3, we're having a much different conversation about Marcus Freeman. If that happens, then there's real evidence that he can get this program headed in the right direction. But right now, as we sit here today on Sunday, October 8th, not a ton to be positive about. And there's not a ton of reasons for me to believe that Notre Dame is going to win out, because it feels like the dam broke last night. It looked like the team was really tired and they're spent and they just were not prepared and they just aren't playing to their full potential right now. And that's really disappointing, because this season had a lot of high hopes. The Dublin game feels like an eternity ago, because I remember being with Luke Smith and some of my other friends and we were thinking, man, this season could be really special. And it's just not. It all came crashing down in Louisville, Kentucky last night. And we're going to be talking about it on this podcast day in and day out, for better or worse. Notre Dame's got a big one on Saturday. And I appreciate you guys all joining me here on this Sunday for what feels like a therapy session for me. I'm sorry if I felt like I was rambling at different points, but morale isn't too high over here at my house in Los Angeles right now. So that is going to do it for me today. Seriously, thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. Remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. I realize that consuming Notre Dame football is not nearly as fun when they're losing. But again, this could be therapeutic for all of us. We're all in this together as fans of this team who we love so much and also cause so much pain. Follow the show on social media. At LOCKEDON Irish is the Twitter. At LOCKEDON Irish Pod is the Instagram. And my own personal Twitter account is at Tyler, WOJCIAK. I will be back on Tuesday with Luke Smith to go over our 3 things. I don't know if there's 3 things that we each like from the game. So it's going to be a lot of things that we didn't like, but we got to cover it all. So stay tuned for that. And I'll see you guys on Tuesday.